Hi there, my name is Alex, and I'm here today with Resonance to talk to you about phase, what it is, and why you should care. In this video, we're going to explore what phase is and how it relates to your work with mixing and engineering in the audio production world. So let's get started. Firstly, what is phase? Technically speaking, phase refers to the difference in degrees between a point in a cycle and its origin. You can think of it as the many phases of the moon. At the start of the moon cycle, or at 0 degrees, the moon is full. A quarter of the way through, or 90 degrees, you get a half moon. Then halfway through a complete cycle, or at 180 degrees, it is completely dark. Then the reverse happens. So at 270 degrees, we have the other side of the half moon, and then back to the full moon at 360 degrees, completing the cycle. What makes it a cycle is it then repeats. The most basic waveform is a sine wave, shown here. In audio terms, phase is referring to the cycle of an audio frequency and its position in time given in degrees. Take a look at this diagram. At the start of this cycle we are at 0 degrees, then at the quarter of the way through we are at 90 degrees, then halfway is 180 degrees, 3/4 of the way 270 degrees, and then 360 or 0 degrees at the end of this cycle and start of the next. Understanding what phase is and how it works is essential when recording audio sources and for when you're using multitracking and duplicating during mixing techniques. Even for the most talented sound engineer, phase shifting is something that's impossible to avoid. Phase shifting can and will occur when you combine audio waveforms. For example, when using two microphones on the same source. This will affect your audio, and if you're not careful, the results can be undesirable. There are two kinds of phase shifting: constructive interference, otherwise known as doubling, and destructive interference, otherwise known as cancelling. If you add two identical waveforms at 0 degrees phase, perfectly in time, then you will get a doubling of amplitude, just as if you had added the amplitudes together mathematically, which is shown in this diagram. If we add two identical waveforms, with one of them phase shifted to 180 degrees, we will get complete cancellation of the amplitude. If you look at any one point and measure the amplitude, you will always get the exact opposite. For example, if waveform 1 is at 2 decibels, then waveform 2, the one at 180 degrees out of phase, will be at minus 2 decibels. Therefore, when summed in a mixer, they will produce 0 dB, i.e. no sound at all. Using phase cancellation in this way is the basis for how noise-cancelling headphones work. Now imagine every other scenario where the second waveform is phase shifted. You will get every combination of constructive and destructive interference you can imagine, reducing and increasing amplitude of the waveform at different times, altering its sound. Let's have a listen to some audio examples. Here in Reactor, I've created a project to demonstrate the effect of combining two sine waves. We can offset the phase of one oscillator and observe the results. You can see on the interface we have three separate oscilloscopes. On the left, at the top, you will see sine wave 1, and below it, sine wave 2. On the right, you'll see the combined result of both sine wave 1 and 2 together. Below this, you can see the delay control, which will delay the signal of sine wave 2 by an amount we set in milliseconds, the result of which will change its phase in relation to sine wave 1. Let's have a quick look behind the hood to see how it's configured. To better understand how this works, you can see that sine wave 1 is being sent to its own oscilloscope, and then routed out so we can hear it. Then you can see here that sine wave 2 is being delayed, the amount of which is set by this control. The output is then sent to its own oscilloscope, and combined with sine wave 1 at the top, the combined audio result is sent to the final oscilloscope and routed out so we can hear it. Both sine wave oscillators are set to 440 Hz and are synchronized together to ensure that they don't drift. Now I will turn up the volume so we can hear it. What you are hearing now is both sine waves combined, about 90 degrees out of phase with each other. The signal is weaker than its original source. As I lessen the delay on sine wave 2, the resultant amplitude increases until we reach 0 degrees phase and hear the doubling in amplitude. This only happens when they are both exactly in phase. Conversely, if I add more delay, we can hear the amplitude decreasing until we get to about 180 degrees phase and have nearly complete cancellation. As I add more delay again, we end up into the regions of 270 degrees and beyond. We can hear the amplitude increasing again until we hit 360 degrees, where the amplitude has doubled again. As 360 degrees is exactly the same as 0 degrees. Hopefully this has made the effects of phase shifting clearer for you. Of course, this is in relation to the most basic waveform, a single tone sine wave. Things get more unpredictable when looking at complex waveforms. But what does this mean in practical terms? Well, as we use multiple microphones to record instruments, it is highly likely that we will introduce phase shifting when summing the microphone signals. Examples include dual microphone setups on guitar amps, overhead microphones on drum kits, and top-bottom miking on snare drums. All of these examples will incur phase issues if not given proper attention. This is because the microphone's distance from the source directly relates to its position on the waveform as it propagates through the air. Have a look at these two microphones set up in front of this guitar cab. Here you can see that microphone A is at 0 degrees phase, and because of its distance from the source, microphone B is at 270 degrees phase. The end result is two recordings of the same source, but they are out of phase with each other. Therefore, the easiest way to ensure that two microphones are in phase is to put them in the same place. But hang on, if the two microphones are in the same place, then why use two microphones at all? The whole point of multiple microphones is to capture other properties or aspects of the source. That might be the fretboard and the body of the guitar separately, or close miking and room miking. So we need another way to ensure that our microphones are in phase. Normally, it is easier for the average human ear to notice when two audio sources are completely out of phase than to hear when they are completely in phase. By that I mean, it's easier to hear the silence created when two sources cancel each other out than it is to hear something that has completely doubled in amplitude. It is because of this that the most reliable and common way to ensure two microphones are in phase is to first invert the phase of one of the microphones. By having one of the microphones 180 degrees out of phase with the other, we can use phase cancellations to our advantage. Place the first microphone wherever you desire, then place the second microphone, which has had its phase flipped, into your second desired location. Then make adjustments to that microphone's placement until the sound is as thin and as quiet as possible. This will mean that the two microphones are now destructively cancelling each other. Now simply flip the polarity of the second microphone back to normal, and suddenly both microphones are closely in phase. It is so common to do this that most studio mixing consoles have a phase flip button, and most DAWs come with the ability to flip phase right out of the box. Let's have a look at an audio example of what I'm talking about. Here we have a reactor project setup, which has a sine wave as a source, representing a guitar amp. As we had before, we've got mic A directly in front of the amp cab, and we are looking to place mic B so it is completely in phase with mic A. We're controlling microphone B and its distance from the amp via this microphone distance slider. As I play with the position of mic B, we can hear that the combined signal gets stronger and weaker. What's difficult is knowing exactly where the amplitude is strongest. It's far easier to hear when it is weakest, as it will be silent. So if we flip the phase of mic B, and then move the microphone around until the signal is weakest, here is good. Now if we unflip the phase, we suddenly have that doubling in amplitude that is associated with being in phase. We can find other positions in the same way. Flip the phase and move the microphone further away. Then when the signal is weakest, flip the phase back. Using this phase flip microphone technique is common, and whilst it's good, it's not perfect. This is great for single tone sources like a snare drum, but guitar cabs, for example, will play multiple different frequencies depending on the performance. So it is inevitable that some phase shifting will occur. We're just going to have to try and limit it as much as possible. Where else might you run into phase? Without going into too much detail, phase will play a big part when it comes to down mixing. If we have a 5.1 or 7.1 surround sound mix, what happens when it's sent to a stereo TV speaker system? Or what happens when we take our stereo rock track and it's played through a mono speaker on a phone or a radio? Mixing down will mean the signals that were initially separate will now be summed together, and that can cause phase shifting. A common example would be when we have a hard-panned multi-track guitar riff. We normally pan them hard left and hard right. In stereo it sounds big and powerful, but when summed to mono, the guitar becomes thin and distant. This happens because the similarity of the two signals cause destructive cancellations. So how do we avoid this? It can be made simple. Make sure you're regularly collapsing your mix to mono to check how it sounds. You can do this in your DAW. Here is an example in Logic. Using the gain plugin and toggling the mono button, you can test your mix to see if there's any noticeable phasing issues. And here's the same thing in Isotope's Ozone plugin. You can also use a separate mono speaker when mixing to hear how your mix sounds before you export it. I like to use a basic low-budget mono speaker to really stress test my mixes. If it sounds good on that, it must be good. You can use correlation meters to monitor phase within your mix. It will give a positive number readout when the mix is showing signs of constructive phase, and it will give a negative number when the mix is showing signs of destructive phase. Phase is a big topic, but there's one thing all engineers agree on. It's as much an art as it is a science. Understanding phase and how it operates is crucial to getting better at audio production, but remember, there's no right answer. As long as it sounds good to you, then it is.
Google Resonance Education or check us out on social media. One Institute, endless opportunities. Join the pioneers.